Welcome into another podcast here with the Key of David. I've got my co-host Trevor Keys and David Douglas, and we have an amazing guest, actually two amazing guests for you guys today. We have Angie and Joseph Abreu. I got that right?
You got that right.
Yep, that's us.
And I want to say Dr. Abreu because he's a doctor, he's a dentist. And you guys are joining us from California?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I want them to really introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about them. And we'll kind of jump into it. But today we're going to cover a lot of topics. We're going to really focus on the Mena record or the Nemenhah record, or as I call it, the Book of the Nem. And but before we get into all of that, what I'd like is for Angie and Joseph to just introduce yourselves to our audience.
Okay. Awesome. I'm Angie Abreu, and I have grown up my whole life in California. I did go to BYU and I graduated from BYU. So I did have that Utah experience and loved it. I come from a large family. I have 5 brothers, no sisters, great parents.
Are you serious? You really have 5 brothers?
Yeah.
My wife's name is Angie. Guess how many brothers she has?
5.
5 brothers. Guess how many sisters she has? 0.
Oh my
I'm
goodness,
not
that's
kidding
crazy. I got to meet her sometime. But yeah, so we work together. We both work in our dental office. I'm a hygienist, he's a dentist. And we have one son, his name's Bentley. He's 10 years old, and we have 80 acres of land that we have going on. We are gonna be hopefully being able to build a house on there, grow some, we're wanting to do a permaculture farm, so like a food forest, and we're very interested in outdoors. We love to snow ski.
Where's your land located?
It's right here in Vacaville where we live. Yeah. And we've had it now for 7 years.
Remarkable.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. It's beautiful. It's on this beautiful spot with beautiful views and everything. So
I'd love to see your farm when it's grown.
yes, you have to. Yeah.
Right now it's weeds.
Yeah, well, it sounds like you've envisioned a Garden of Eden of your own.
Right.
Starting. We got one grapefruit tree that pretty much gives fruit all year long. So it's pretty amazing.
And 40 little fruit trees that I have babied from the time that they were like little sprouts. So we're kind
Awesome.
of, you learn so much by being out in nature and just being out with, all of nature. We have animals, birds. My son's a birder, so we love to look at birds and count
Amazing.
the birds and stuff like that.
And Joseph, tell us a little bit about, who you are, and maybe jump right into your conversion story as well, if you
Okay.
could include that.
So yeah, they kind of go together. I grew up Seventh-day Adventist. I'd never joined the church because I could see there were problems with it, but we still went to church and did all of that. I went to Loma Linda University for my dental school. That's in Southern California, and that was the Seventh-day Adventist University. So it was kind of nice to be there. I was like, great. I always wanted to be in the religious background and get more, but it just wasn't ever the right thing. And that was while I was there in my first year that the missionaries knocked on my door. And I was excited to see them. And it's kind of a funny story, but I was dating somebody who was a Mormon. And we were going to church. We were kind of alternating one church, then the other church, one church, the other church, back and forth. But we would never stay long enough to get to know anybody or any of that. So I didn't know any of the stuff, and really hadn't. It's kind of funny because I was dating her for a year and I still didn't get any introduction to the Book of Mormon. So I'm not sure how that went, but so the first time that I opened the book was literally with the missionaries that day. And, they, of course, read 3rd Nephi, and they asked me to pray about it afterwards. And I'm like, I don't need to pray about it. I know this happened. Like, I literally knew. They're like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, just as much as I know that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are true, I says, this record's true. Like, I just knew it. The Spirit was talking so strongly. So I had a really strong testimony of the Book of Mormon, and I kept studying and studying. I wanted to make sure that I really knew the religion inside and out before I kind of joined in. And that's where it kind of got hard. This was 1997, and the internet wasn't very far along. I knew that there was different groups of Mormons, all that accept the Book of Mormon and all that accept the Joseph Smith as the prophet, but that they all had different viewpoints. But it was so early on that in the internet stage that couldn't really find out much information. And I felt that the only way to figure anything out would have actually been to go there and, ask directly, because a lot of these places, they're only in certain locations or certain regions. And so I did some more study and finally decided, like, the only one that really fits, because I was already planning to go back home to Vacaville. My dad was a dentist. I was joining him in his practice and work together. And I already knew, like, there really isn't another option. If I want to learn more about the Book of Mormon in Vacaville, really LDS was the only option there. So ultimately I did get baptized. I baptized about 2 years later. I had studied the plan of salvation through and through. I could pretty much prove the plan of salvation works from just the Bible. And at that time I was figuring, well, I'll go home and I've got Seventh-day Adventist, that's my whole family, and I'll just be able to go back and teach them the gospel and everybody will join. And it was kind of surprising because I got back and to this day, not a single one has read the Book of Mormon. Wow. So it's been a little bit surprising, but it's a little bit understandable too. When people get to their religion and what they believe they know to be true, it's a lot of times hard to accept that there might be something different. I don't know what's so different about me. I've always been able to jump to whatever's new or I feel is better, or if it's right the very next day, without too much of a difficulty. So yeah, I did join, did get baptized, moved back, tried to share the gospel over and over and over. My patriarchal blessing talked about me sharing the gospel, some with people that aren't of our faith, but even more so with people who are of our faith. And that was a verse that always confused me. I'm like, how is that ever going to work? And it didn't show up for 20 years until it was actually probably one of the only people able to say this, but I loved COVID. I loved sitting home.
Let me, I want to get into this because I know where this is going, and I want to keep the conversation because we had such a good conversation. Before we jump into the COVID time period, I want to backtrack just a little bit.
Yeah.
And I want to get both of yours opinions and views on the Book of Mormon. Now, I've heard you, Joseph, say, hey, 3rd Nephi chapter 11, I knew it was true. Angie, where are you with the Book of Mormon? What are your thoughts on the Book of Mormon?
I love the Book of Mormon. I've read it since, I've been a member my whole life. And so I grew up with the Book of Mormon. I think that what I love most about the Book of Mormon is that it teaches you about Christ. Christ is definitely the most interesting aspect of any new record that I would read, because if he's not in there, it's like I'm not really as interested in it. But the Book of Mormon is like, I love it. I have no problems with the Book of Mormon.
And would you say that your testimony has, as you've explored some of these other records we're going to talk about, would you say that your testimony in the Book of Mormon has increased, decreased, stayed the same? Give me a little bit of...
It's definitely increased, because what you find is as you read some of these records that are now coming forth, is that the Book of Mormon is kind of like a central book. The Bible, the New Testament, I would say, like, the Book of Mormon is a record that is definitely has the correlation with all these other records. The characters in the Book of Mormon, you'll find that they're in the Nemenhah record. And then even a couple other records that I've read has, like, the brother of Jared, Moroni. So the Lord, I
So,
believe,
so
when he talks about his curious work and wonder and his marvelous work and wonder, I think that what he's doing is with these little remnant groups, he's at the time of, you know, Jerusalem, Israel, like he splintered them off. And it's like when the prophet says, oh, we need to be concerned about like finding the tribes and the different remnant groups. The Lord's been doing a lot of things with these groups, and now the records are coming forth, and we're being able to learn a lot more of what the Lord did, you know, back in those earlier times.
gotcha. So you guys you're in the church, you're reading the Book of Mormon, and I'm just kind of describing your life, and I want to get to 2017. And, you know, everybody knows we had the solar eclipse. Can you tell me like what your thought was there with what was going on with the solar eclipse, and kind of what your, could you had shared it with me before that was a pivotal time for you?
Well, at that time, in 2017, it was just a solar eclipse to me. I hadn't done any of the research. Then it was actually during COVID. And the reason I loved COVID so much is I've always wanted to study the scriptures, but with the job and there's just never been time, you know. And during COVID was great. I got to make myself omelets in the morning and put all the mixings in, and I had time to do all the study that I wanted. So I dove into end times prophecies, and I tried to figure everything out that I never had time to do. And then it's kind of like once I made the space for that, it's been there ever since. But COVID allowed me to make that space. And it was during that time period that we discovered a lot of the end times prophecies. We found stuff out about, it wasn't actually the eclipse that I was finding out about. It was an event that was within a month of the eclipse. And that was Jupiter going into Virgo and coming out of Virgo 9 months later. And the significance of that event was that star event occurred this night that Moroni gave Joseph Smith the plates to translate. So it wasn't related to the first vision or, you know, the recurring comings, but actually the date that he was delivered the plates to begin the translation, that was supposedly the same date that this event had last happened.
I made a video on that.
Yeah.
On my Ancient Answers.
And when we first saw that, you know, we didn't know, you know, correlate it. We're like, well, what does the sign mean? It's got to mean something. It's got, because we just had this again. And I was getting nothing. Angie was getting the answers. And she woke up one morning and she's like, I know what it is. The Lord told me, like, there's more scriptures and we've got to find them. And so that we kind of did the math. I figured if it took him 3.5 years from the time he was given the plate till the time it was in production to translate it, get it in and get it out in book form, I was kind of looking at that same time period like, well, if it was me, I'd have it done the same time period. So I was calculating from it. I'm like, well, it's probably this conference or that conference, but we'll get the announcement that there's new scriptures here and we can finally read some new stuff. And those conference came and the first one came and it went and I was all excited and there was no announcement. And then the second one, I'm like, you know, I'm just getting a feeling that I want it to come, but I'm just getting a feeling that it's not coming. And of course it didn't come. We didn't get an announcement of new scriptures. And, but by this time I was in a lot of Facebook groups and stuff that were talking about end times prophecies and whatnot. And someone had mentioned like, so we have this record and this record and this record, how long before such and such happens? And I'm like, wait, what? Like, I don't know of any of those records. Like, what are they? And being a convert, I know how this works. Just give me the record. The Spirit's either going to do two things. It's going to testify or it's not going to testify. Just give me the book. I'll read it. So he sent over the records and I got a testimony of it right away. I couldn't get her to read it yet.
So you dig into the Mena records, you start reading it,
Yeah.
and you tell your wife, hey, go
I'm like,
check
Haggis
this
been
out.
here.
How did that go?
I said,
Well, he was like reading it one night and he's like, oh my gosh, honey, you'll never believe this. Moroni's in this record. And I was like, yeah, I don't believe that. Like, why would, it didn't register. And so for probably about a month, he was reading it and asking me each night, you got to read this record. And I'm like, I just don't see, I in my mind, I kind of thought, oh, he's just excited because it's end times, everything is, everything. And during that time period, especially, was just kind of like up in the air. And so
are you thinking like most people, like, hey, if there's going to be any new scripture, like they're going to announce it in the conference. If this is true, it's going to come
through the proper channels.
right.
It's going to come through the proper channels. So is that kind of your mindset as well with kind of being dismissive like that?
Absolutely. Because, I just thought that was, I thought that was going to be how it was. And so one night, we were both sitting on the couch and he's like, we weren't really doing anything. And he's like, why don't you read that record? And I'm like, okay, I'll read it, and I thought in my mind, I'll read it to kind of like prove him wrong. And when I opened up the book, I got to the part where it says, you have to utilize the Holy Ghost, to kind of realize if this book is true or not. And it was just, it's like the same thing that we tell missionaries, or like missionaries tell people when they're reading the Book of Mormon, you have to utilize the Spirit. And so when I read that, I thought, okay. And then I felt the Spirit, testify that. And so I kind of continued reading, and I mean, not within like 2 or 3 pages, I felt that familiar feeling. Like when you're reading the Book of Mormon, you just like a feeling of like, this is making sense for one thing. And another thing, I started feeling the Spirit when I started reading about Hagoth. And then it took me a while to get to Moroni, but when I did finally get to Moroni, I just knew, I'm like, this is Moroni, because of the Spirit for one Spirit. And then also because of the things that Moroni was talking about, he was talking about his life in the Book of Mormon. And so it's like, it made sense. But I think that I got my testimony of it towards the end of the book, where I felt the Spirit so strongly that I couldn't move. Like, it was just like really boldly testifying that this is what it is. This is a record that has been really written by these people who left in ships and came up to North America and wanted to escape the Gadianton. They wanted to escape the Nephite Lamanite wars, and they were doing it with the Spirit leading them. And then, I mean, I love the Native Americans, and it made sense to know that they had come up to Northern America and spread all across west to east coast, and then they talk about the white man coming and how the white man's going to come and, kill them and bring disease. And it all fits in with history. The geography fits. Like, they talk about going up into like, the salt flat, or the lake of the salt.
The Salt Sea, yeah.
Yeah, and the Missouri or the Mississippi River, they describe the geography really, really well. And we would get our little globe and look and see, as they describe certain things. And yeah, and so that's basically how I was introduced to it.
So for a lot of people, they're not familiar with this record. I consider myself, pretty astute when it comes to scriptures. I read 20 to 25 books a month when I was in prison, and I had never heard of this until just a couple of months ago. And so for a lot of people, this is all brand new, even though it's been around for, 10, 15, 20 years. But Joseph, if you wouldn't mind just giving our listeners kind of a brief history or synopsis of what the Mena records are, what the breakoff is, and maybe you shared with me some geography. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen when we get to the geography spot. David, if you could, when he gets there, throw that map up there that I sent you earlier. But yeah, maybe just give our listeners a little bit of history so they can understand what the record is or where it's from.
So nobody should feel bad. The first record is Haggith. Haggith wrote the first record in there, and I had to look that up. got out my thing and did the search, and I'm like, oh, Haggith is in the Book of Mormon, and I go to find out and read out all about Haggith.
Well, and let me just, I know you're going to bring this up, but let me just pull up. Literally, you sent this to me, and I'm like, I had to look it up. I had to go to, what was it? Alma 63.
Alma 63.
And I'm like, there were 5,400 people. I'm going to just read it because I've read the Book of Mormon 100 times. And I went
right over your head.
right over my, it says, and it came to pass that in the 37th year of the reign of the judges, there was a large company of men, even to the amount of 5,400 men, and their wives and their children departed out of the land of Zarahemla into the land which was northward. Okay. Yeah. Wow. Okay.
That's going. A lot of people. You know, you're thinking, well, these families of four, these three kids, a husband and a wife. So that multiply that number times 5 or 6 or 7 if the families are bigger. I don't know what their family size is, but you're quickly looking at
30,000 people.
1,000 people, yeah, walking by foot, wherever
going
they started,
north.
Going north, and not coming back. And it says, you know, in a couple of verses later, you know, Haggith built ships and they sailed away, and they came back and got more people, and they sailed away again, and then at some point they're never heard of again. Corianton was the captain of a ship, and he went north as well. So you've got Corianton going north, Haggith going north, all these ships going north.